Training your dog can provide a number of benefits, such as improving their temperament and obedience, and increasing their overall happiness and well-being. It is important to begin training early on, using positive reinforcement techniques such as treats and praise. Consistency is key in training, and it's important to establish clear rules and boundaries for your dog to follow.
The sun beats down on the golden sands of the beach as waves crash rhythmically against the shore. The salty air fills your lungs as you kick off your shoes and feel the cool sand between your toes. You spread out your towel and relax as the gentle hum of beachgoers and seagulls drowns out the stresses of everyday life. Coffee is more than just a beverage, it's a way of life. From the bold aroma to the rich taste, coffee provides a daily boost of energy and happiness. It's true that some people are sensitive to caffeine, but coffee can still be enjoyed in moderation, and with so many different brewing methods and flavors to choose from, there's a perfect cup of coffee out there for everyone. I stood at the edge of the cliff, feeling the wind whip through my hair as I looked out at the vast sea below. The colors of the water ranged from a deep navy blue to a sparkling turquoise. I took a deep breath of the salty sea air and felt a sense of peace wash over me. This was the beauty of the Croatian coast.
Adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, is the molecule that provides energy for most biological processes in living cells. It is often referred to as the molecular unit of currency within the cell. ATP is formed through a process called cellular respiration, which occurs in the mitochondria of cells.
As a child, I used to spend hours playing in my grandmother's garden. She had an array of colorful flowers and herbs growing throughout the yard, and she would teach me about each one. She had a particular love of lavender, and I remember her telling me stories about how she used to dry it and make sachets to put in her drawers.
Did you know that the Great Barrier Reef is the largest living structure on Earth? This incredible natural wonder spans over 2,300 km and is home to thousands of species of marine life. Unfortunately, it's also under threat due to climate change and other environmental factors.
The city is full of life and energy. Tall buildings tower over busy streets, while the sound of horns and chatter echoes through the air. The scent of street food wafts through the alleys, luring people to stop and take a bite of the locals' favorite street snacks. As day turns to night, the city lights up with neon signs and twin.
The forest was a symphony of sound and color, the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds creating harmonious melody. The trees towered above, their branches reaching towards the sky. The air was fresh and invigorating, filled with the scent of pine and earth. In this natural oasis, the hustle and bustle of the city felt worlds away.
formed millions to billions of years ago. Diamonds can shine light into the darkest and oldest parts of the Earth's mantle. The analysis of ancient, super deep diamonds dug up from mines in Brazil and Western Africa has exposed new processes of how continents evolved and moved during the early evolution of complex life on Earth. Researchers have published a study that addresses possible associations between chronic stress, mild cognitive impairment, and Alzheimer's disease. The study shows how people aged between 18 and 65 with a previous diagnosis of chronic stress and depression were more likely than other people to be diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's disease.
Fine chemical and pharmaceutical manufacturing are major sources of pollution, with recent studies showing the carbon footprint of the pharmaceutical industry to be heavier than the automotive industry. Beyond greenhouse gas emissions, the pharmaceutical industry is also responsible for other serious environmental impacts, such as water pollution from wastewater released by manufacturers.
Stations shutting down for unscheduled maintenance reduces hydrogen fueling availability to consumers and may slow the adoption of these types of fuel cell electric vehicles, the researchers noted. The use of what is known as a prognostic health monitoring model would allow hydrogen stations to reduce these unscheduled events.
Counting seals is harder than it may appear. Surveys typically assess numbers at seal breeding beaches, but these figures are skewed because most male fur seals at South Georgia don't usually breed until they are 10 years old, and then only 40 to 3 years. That means some 80 of the male population is missing from surveys, and how researchers account for this can overstate the overall count.
The growing global population needs sufficient food. Its production causes overfertilization and increased nitrogen concentration in agriculture, which negatively affects the population, climate, and ecosystems. According to new models, however, today's crop production might be maintained with a far smaller global fertilizer consumption if nitrogen fertilizer would be used more homogeneously across global croplands.
This heat shock response of cells is a classic model of biological adaptation, part of the fundamental processes of life conserved in creatures from single-celled yeast to humans that allow our cells to adjust to changing conditions in their environment. For years, scientists have focused on how different genes respond to heat stress to understand this survival technique. The legendary Alexander Fleming, who famously discovered penicillin, once said never to neglect an extraordinary appearance or happening, and the path of science often leads to just that. New research is turning the page in our understanding harmful bacteria and how they turn on certain genes, causing disease in our bodies. Eastern North Pacific ray whales are one of the few populations of large whales that have recovered to what may be similar numbers that existed prior to commercial whaling. As the population has approached levels close to what their Arctic feeding areas can support, they have likely become more sensitive to environmental conditions due to competition for limited resources.
The tropics were identified as having a heightened vulnerability to the interaction of climate change and land use, meaning crops such as coffee, cocoa, mango and watermelon, which all rely on insect pollination, are at the greatest risk. These crops play vital roles in both local economies and global trade, and their reduction could cause increased income insecurity for millions of small-scale farmers in these regions.
With each passing year, trees add a ring around their trunks. The ring width is determined by the climate they experience. Favorable conditions mean wider rings and unfavorable conditions mean thinner. As climate varies from year to year, it creates time-specific patterns like a barcode in the growth of trees within a region. Large Marimo are now thought to be exclusively found in Lake Aiken, and as seen from the data, even there they have become threatened. Therefore, it is necessary to propose measures to protect Marimo from global warming, such as utilizing the Kura River water that flows into the Marimo colony.
Likewise, several of the proteins in the study were chosen for their similarities to the key attributes of the fantasy impromptu style. Most of the 18 proteins tested regulate functions including human emotion, cognition, sensation, or performance, which the authors say connect to the emotional and expressive of the genre.
Those who switched from precarious to secure employment had a 20% lower risk of death, regardless of what happened afterward, compared to those who remained in precarious employment. If they remained in secure employment for 12 years, the risk of death decreased by 30%. Time is one of humanity's greatest blind spots. We experience it as days, months, or years. But nature functions on much grander scales, measured in centuries, millennia, and even longer intervals, often lumped together as deep time. As paleontologists, we were trained to think in deep time, yet, as conservationists, we've come to realize that time can be confounding.
Cats have nailed this one thing so well that they all do it and just come up with slightly different sizes. That's why they're perfect. Evolutionary, they don't need variation. They might get bigger or smaller, but they don't change anything else because they're doing it just right otherwise. They're not jacks of all trades, they're masters of one.